The huge alien meeting room was filled with angry voices and the sound of many different creatures talking at once. Ambassador Veltor from the Zenthari Empire was furious, and his purple skin was getting darker by the minute. He had 6 fingers on each hand, and right now he was using one of those hands to hit the crystal table so hard it made a loud crack sound. The big screen in the middle of the room showed planet Earth floating in space like a small blue ball. It looked so peaceful and quiet that it was hard to believe it was home to billions of people. The aliens stared at it with different emotions. Some looked angry, others looked disappointed, and a few looked like they wanted to laugh. Veltor stood up from his chair, and his voice came through the translator machine that hung around his neck. The machine made his angry words sound even more scary than they already were. He pointed one of his long purple fingers at the image of Earth and spoke loudly so everyone could hear him. The humans have had 3 full years to get ready, he said, and his voice echoed around the big room. Every single species in this galaxy that calls itself civilized sends at least 50 warships to fight the Devourers. Where are their ships? Where is their fleet? The other aliens in the room started nodding their heads and making sounds of agreement. The Hive Queen was there too, and she was a giant insect creature with huge eyes that reflected light like mirrors. She clicked her sharp mouth parts together in a rhythm that sounded like angry clicking. The sound was so loud that some of the smaller aliens had to cover their ears. Next to her sat the representatives of the ethereals, who were not solid like the other creatures. Instead, they looked like colored gas or smoke that moved and swirled in the air. They were shimmering with colors that changed from blue to red to green, showing that they were not happy at all. The Devourers were coming, and everyone knew it. They came every 100 years like a terrible disease that spread across the galaxy. These creatures were not like any normal life form. They ate everything they could find: planets, stars, ships, and even the empty space between worlds. Nothing was safe. When the Devourers arrived for thousands of years, the different alien species had worked together to fight them off. It was never easy, and they always lost many ships and many lives. But they had a system that worked. Every species would send their best warships and their bravest fighters. They would meet the Devourers at the edge of the galaxy and fight them until they went back to the dark, empty space where they came from. But this time something was different. The humans were supposed to help. The Galactic Council had sent them messages 3 years ago telling them about the Devourers and asking them to build ships to help fight. The humans had said yes, they would help, but now the time was almost here and there were no human ships anywhere to be seen on planet Earth. Far away from all the angry aliens, Captain Kim Dae-ho was standing in a secret military base. The base was built deep under the mountains in Korea, so deep that even the most powerful alien sensors could not find it. The walls were made of metal and concrete, and they were covered with screens showing information that would scare most people. Kim Dae-ho was not most people. He was tall and strong, with short black hair and eyes that had seen many battles. He had been a soldier for most of his life, and now he was in charge of the most important secret project in human history. He wore a simple military uniform with no fancy decorations because he did not care about looking important. He only cared about results. Around him, dozens of people worked at computer stations. Their fingers moved quickly over keyboards, and their eyes were focused on screens full of numbers and pictures that most people would not understand. These were the best scientists and engineers that Earth had to offer, and they had been working day and night for 3 years. Lieutenant Park So-ra was one of these people. She was young but very smart, and she had been chosen for this project because she could understand things that even older scientists found difficult. She had long black hair that she kept tied back so it would not get in her way while she worked. Her uniform was always neat and clean. Even after working for many hours, she looked up from her computer screen and spoke to Captain Kim Dae-ho. Sir, she said, the aliens are sending us more messages. They are getting angry because they think we are not going to help them fight. They say if we do not send ships, they will not protect Earth when the Devourers come. Kim Dae-ho walked over to her station and looked at the messages on her screen. The alien writing looked like strange symbols and pictures, but the computer translated it into words. He could read. The messages were not polite. They were full of threats and angry words, calling humans cowards and weaklings. Let them think what they want, Lieutenant Kim Dae-ho said with a small smile on his face. They will understand soon enough how is Project Phoenix going. Project Phoenix was the secret. That no alien knew about it was not a fleet of 50 ships like the aliens expected. It was something much more dangerous and much more powerful. Deep under the base in a room so big it could hold a city the greatest minds of humanity had built. Something that would change everything. Dr. Lee Min-ho was down in that big room right now, checking the final systems of their creation. He was the smartest person on Earth when it came to physics and engineering. He had spent his whole life studying how the universe worked, and now he was using that knowledge to build something that should not be possible. The thing they had built was not just a ship. It was a weapon that used science the aliens did not even know existed, while the aliens had been happy with their old technology. Humans had been pushing the limits of what was possible. They had learned to bend the rules of physics and make them work in new ways. Dr. Lee Min-ho ran his hands over control panels that glowed with strange light. The numbers on his screens showed power levels that would make alien scientists think their instruments were broken. He had discovered how to tap into forces that existed in the empty space between atoms, forces that most creatures thought were just theory. The countdown had started, and soon the whole galaxy would see what humans could do when they decided to fight. The aliens thought Earth was weak because humans had not sent the ships they expected, but they were wrong. Earth was not weak. Earth was preparing to show them what real power looked like. In a few days, the alien fleets would gather at the edge of the galaxy, ready to fight the Devourers with their old weapons and their old tactics. They would be waiting for the human ships that were never coming. Instead, they would get something that would make them question everything they thought they knew about war and science and what was possible in the universe. Captain Kim Dae-ho looked at the countdown clock on the wall and smiled. The aliens wanted 50 ships from Earth. They were going to get one ship, but that one ship would be worth more than all their fleets combined. The galaxy was about to learn that sometimes the best answer to an impossible problem was to make the impossible possible. 3 days had passed since the angry meeting at the Galactic Council, and now thousands of alien warships were gathering at Kepler Station. The station was huge, like a metal city floating in space at the very edge of where civilized creatures lived. Beyond it was only darkness and the terrible things that came from that darkness. The alien ships formed neat rows and patterns in space. Each ship was different because each species built their ships in their own way. The Xanthari ships looked like purple crystals with weapons sticking out of them. The Aquatic Federation ships were round and smooth like giant water drops. The reptilian ships had scales and looked like flying snakes made of metal. Admiral Zephyros of the Aquatic Federation floated in his special tank filled with water. His body looked like a giant octopus with long arms that moved like they were dancing in the water. Around his tank were screens showing all the ships that had come to fight the Devourers. He was proud of what he saw, but also worried still. No sign of the human ships, he said to his officers, and his voice made bubbles in the water. The humans are probably hiding behind their moon like scared children. Maybe they think if they stay quiet the Devourers will not notice them. The other alien commanders were thinking the same thing. They had given the humans 3 years to build ships and send them to help fight. Now the time for fighting was almost here, and there were no human ships anywhere. Many of the aliens were starting to think that humans were cowards who would let others fight their battles for them, but then something happened that made every alien in the fleet stop what they were doing and stare in shock. Space itself began to change. Near the station, it looked like someone was tearing a hole in the darkness. A bright blue light started swirling and spinning, getting bigger and bigger until it was large enough for a ship to fly through. The hole in space grew wider and brighter, and strange sounds came through it that hurt the aliens' ears. Then, from the center of the swirling light came a ship, but it was not like any ship the aliens had ever seen before. The ship was enormous, much bigger than even the largest alien war ships. It was so big that it made the other ships look like toys. The hull was not made of normal metal. Instead, it seemed to flow and change like liquid mercury. Patterns covered the surface that were hard to look at directly because they seemed to move and shift even when the ship was still. Strange blue and white energy danced along the ship's surface like lightning, but lightning that never went away. The energy made crackling sounds that could be heard even in the vacuum of space, which should have been impossible. Every sensor on every alien ship started screaming warnings about power readings that were higher than anything they had ever measured. Captain Kim Dae-ho sat in the command chair of the ship humans called the Ascendant. The bridge was different from anything the aliens would recognize. Instead of having lots of buttons and switches, everything was controlled by thought and will. The crew members wore special helmets that connected their minds directly to the ships. Systems Commander Choi Jun Seo was sitting at the tactical station. His job was to control the weapons, but the weapons on this ship were not lasers or missiles. They were things that existed only in the dreams of scientists, forces that could change the rules of reality itself. His screens showed targeting systems that could lock onto enemies in 17 different dimensions at the same time. Yang Haijin was the navigation officer, but she did not navigate through normal space. Instead, she plotted courses through dimensions that other species did not even know existed. Her charts showed pathways through time and space that allowed the ship to be in many places at once. Kim Dae-ho pressed a button and his voice was broadcast to every ship in the alien fleet. "This is Captain Kim Dae-ho of the Earth vessel Ascendant," he said calmly. "We apologize for being late. We brought one ship as requested." The reaction from the alien fleet was immediate and explosive. Thousands of voices filled the communication channels, all talking at once. Some aliens were angry, others were confused, and many were laughing because they thought the humans were making a joke. One ship screamed Ambassador Velter from his command ship, "How dare you mock us? In our time of need we asked for 50 ships to help fight for all our lives, and you bring us one ship." But even as Velter was shouting, other alien commanders were looking at their sensor readings and realizing that something was very wrong. The human ship was not just big, it was putting out more energy than their entire combined fleet. The power signature was so strong that some of the more sensitive instruments were shutting down to protect themselves from overload. Admiral Zephyros' tentacles were moving frantically as he tried to understand what his sensors were telling him. "The readings have to be wrong," he gurgled to his staff. "Nothing can generate that much power without exploding." Dr. Lee Min-ho was working calmly in the Ascendant engineering section, surrounded by machines that used principles the galaxy's greatest scientists would need hundreds of years to understand. He was not just an engineer, he was someone who had learned to bend the fundamental forces of the universe to his will. The systems he monitored drew power directly from the quantum vacuum, the empty space between atoms that was not really empty at all but filled with infinite energy. Most species thought this energy could never be used because trying to tap into it would destroy entire solar systems, but humans had found a way. Lieutenant Park So Ra worked at her station, coordinating with quantum computers back on Earth that could calculate the position and movement of every atom in a solar system. She was helping to target weapons that could strike enemies in the past, present, and future all at the same time. The alien fleet commanders continued to argue and complain, but their sensor officers were becoming more and more frightened. As they tried to analyze the human ship, every scan revealed new impossibilities. The ship seemed to exist in several different dimensions. Simultaneously, its hull was made of materials that should not be able to exist. Its engines were creating effects that violated every known law of physics. Some of the younger alien officers began to whisper that maybe the humans had not built a warship at all. Maybe they had built something else, something that was beyond the understanding of normal creatures, something that treated the laws of nature like suggestions that could be ignored when convenient. The Ascendant hung in space among the alien fleet like a predator that had wandered into a flock of sheep. The other ships suddenly looked primitive and weak compared to this vessel that seemed to be made of crystallized impossibility itself. Captain Kim Dae-ho smiled as he watched the alien reactions on his screens. They had expected humanity to follow their rules, to build ships the way everyone else built ships, to fight the way everyone else fought. But humans had never been good at following other people's rules. Soon the Devourers would arrive, and the galaxy would see what happened when an unstoppable force met something even more unstoppable. The aliens thought they were looking at one ship, but they were actually looking at proof that humanity had evolved beyond the limitations that other species accepted as natural law. The darkness at the edge of the galaxy began to move and shift like something huge was swimming through the black emptiness between the stars. At first it looked like just shadows, but then the shadows started to take shape and the alien fleet realized they were looking at something that would give them nightmares for the rest of their lives. The Devourers had arrived, and they came in numbers that made the bravest warriors feel sick with fear. They did not fly through space in ships like normal creatures. Instead, they were the ship's living, breathing things that had grown instead of being built. Each Devourer was the size of a city, but they moved through space like giant sea creatures swimming through water their bodies pulsed with veins of sickly green light that ran along their dark hulls like infected blood vessels. The light throbbed in rhythm like a heartbeat, but it was the heartbeat of something that should never have been alive. Feeding tentacles covered their surfaces. Long writhing arms that could reach out and grab anything they wanted to eat. The worst part was not how they looked, but how many there were. Millions of them filled the empty space, stretching out further than the most powerful telescopes could. See, they moved together like a swarm of insects, but each insect was large enough to swallow a moon. The combined hunger of so many creatures was so strong it created ripples in space itself. Commander Thizes of the reptilian hegemony was an old warrior who had fought the Devourers twice before in his long life. His scales were scarred from battles with pirates and rebels, and he had never been afraid of anything that lived or died. But now his hands were shaking as he stared at the tactical display by the Ancient Ones. He whispered, and his voice cracked with fear. There are 10 times more than the last time they came. How can one human ship make any difference against this? The other alien commanders were asking themselves the same question. They had fought Devourers before, but never so many. The traditional way to fight them was to use hit-and-run tactics, attacking small groups and then running away before the main swarm could catch them. It took months of careful fighting to wear them down enough to make them leave, but this swarm was different. It was not just bigger, it was smarter. The Devourers were learning from their past defeats, and they had changed their tactics. Instead of spreading out like they used to do, they were staying together in one massive group that could overwhelm any defense captain. Kim Dae-ho stood on the bridge of the Ascendant, watching the approaching swarm with the calm expression of someone who had planned for exactly this situation. His crew worked quietly at their stations, making final preparations for a battle that would decide the fate of every living thing in the galaxy. Lieutenant Park. So, Ra was connected to quantum computers back on Earth that could calculate targeting solutions for enemies that existed in several dimensions at once. The computers were so advanced they could predict where each Devourer would be before the creature itself knew where it was going. The ship's AI spoke with a voice that sounded like Carius' greatest military general from history, but the words came from a computer that thought faster than any living brain. Captain, the AI said, all weapon systems are ready for deployment. The reality anchors are stable and the dimensional barriers are holding in sign. Bae Seung-min looked up from his sensor station with worry in his young eyes. Captain, he reported, the Devourers are changing their formation. They are trying to surround the entire Allied fleet. If they succeed, we will be trapped with no way to escape. Kim Dae-ho nodded slowly, as if this was exactly what he had expected. Maintain our position, he ordered calmly. Let them come to us. The alien commanders could not believe what they were hearing. The human ship was staying perfectly still in space, while their own fleets were moving frantically to avoid being surrounded. Did the humans not understand how dangerous the Devourers were? One ship, no matter how big, could not possibly fight millions of enemies. But Dr. Lee Min-ho was smiling as he worked in the engineering section, surrounded by machines that operated according to laws of physics that had not existed before humans invented them. The Ascendant was not just a ship, it was a mobile laboratory where the fundamental forces of the universe were tested and redesigned. He activated systems that existed in 7 different dimensions at the same time. Each system drew power from sources that alien scientists thought were impossible to use. Energy flowed through crystalline matrices that converted pure thought into physical force. Matter and antimatter danced together in patterns that created new elements that lasted for exactly as long as they were needed. The Devourers kept coming closer, and the alien fleet could see details that made them even more afraid. Each creature had thousands of eyes that glowed with hunger and intelligence. These were not mindless beasts, they were thinking creatures that enjoyed causing pain and destruction. They had fed on countless civilizations, and each meal had made them stronger and smarter. Some of the younger aliens began to panic, and their ships started to break formation. A few tried to run away, but the Devourers were faster than any normal ship. The creatures caught the fleeing vessels and began to feed, tearing them apart with tentacles that could cut through any known armor. The remaining alien commanders watched in horror as their carefully planned battle formation fell apart. Some ships were trying to fight, others were trying to run, and still others were frozen in place by fear. The coordinated defense that had worked for thousands of years was collapsing before the battle had even begun, but the Ascendant remained perfectly still in the center of the chaos. Captain Kim Daeho watched the destruction around him without changing expression. His crew continued their preparations as if they were getting ready for a training exercise instead of a battle that would determine whether their species lived or died. Commander Choi Jun SEO reported from his tactical station. Sir, all weapon systems are charged and ready. The targeting computers have locked onto primary targets. Reality distortion fields are at maximum power. Yang Haijin called out from navigation. Sir, we have stable connections to all dimensional pathways. The quantum tunnels are open and we can begin phase shifting on your command. The Devourers were close enough now that their hungry roaring could be heard even in the vacuum of space. It was not a sound that traveled through air, but a vibration that moved through the fabric of space itself, the sound of infinite hunger approaching its next meal. Captain Kim Dae-ho looked at the countdown timer on his screen and smiled. The aliens had wanted 50 ships to fight the Devourers. They were about to learn that sometimes the best way to solve an impossible problem was to make new rules that made the problem possible to solve. The galaxy was about to witness what happened when human determination met technology that treated the laws of physics like guidelines that could be changed when necessary. The age of conventional warfare was about to end, and the age of impossible victories was about to begin. The first wave of Devourers hit the alien fleet like a tsunami made of teeth and claws and endless hunger. Creatures the size of cities moved faster than the aliens thought possible, crashing into their carefully arranged battle formations and tearing through energy shields that were supposed to be able to stop anything. The alien warships that had seemed so powerful just minutes before were suddenly revealed to be fragile toys in the face of this ancient evil. Energy beams that could destroy planets bounced harmlessly off the Devourers' thick hides. Missiles that could crack moons were swallowed by feeding tentacles and digested before they could explode. Admiral Zephyros watched in horror from his command tank as 3 of his best ships were wrapped in glowing tentacles and crushed like eggs. The creatures were not just destroying the ships, they were eating them, absorbing their metal and energy and using it to grow larger and stronger. This is impossible, he gurgled to his officers while his tentacles writhed in panic. Our shields should be able to withstand anything. How are they getting through? But Captain Kim Dae-ho watched the carnage with the calm expression of someone who had studied this enemy for years and knew exactly what was happening. The Devourers were not using normal weapons. They were using something much more dangerous. They were using hunger itself as a force that could break down the barriers between dimensions. Tactical Officer Choi, he said quietly, you may begin the demonstration. Commander Choi Jun SEO nodded, and his hands moved across controls that looked like they were made of crystallized light. Activating Harmony Protocol, he announced all departments report ready for phase transition. What happened next would be talked about by alien scientists for generations, if any of them survived long enough to do the talking. The Ascendant simply disappeared from normal space, leaving behind only a sphere of twisted reality where the ship had been. The sphere pulsed with colors that hurt to look at and made strange sounds that seemed to come from inside the observers' heads. The Devourers that had been rushing toward the human ship suddenly found themselves caught in a gravitational anomaly that compressed space and time into impossible shapes. Some of the creatures were stretched out until they became thin lines of matter. Others were compressed into tiny dots that contained all their original mass. Then the Ascendant reappeared, but not in one place. Instead, it appeared in 17 different locations throughout the Devourer swarm, each copy of the ship looking as solid and real as the others. Each manifestation began firing weapons that should not have been able to exist. According to any known science, beams of crystallized time shot out from the ship's weapons and struck devourer vessels, aging them millions of years and seconds. The ancient creatures that had survived since the beginning of the galaxy crumbled to dust as time accelerated around them. Missiles that traveled backwards through cause and effect hit their targets before they were fired, creating paradoxes that unraveled entire sections of the enemy formation. "This is impossible," gasped Admiral Zephyros as his sensors tried to make sense of what they were seeing. "They are violating every law of physics at the same time. How can they exist in 17 places simultaneously?" Navigation Officer Yang Hai-jin reported calmly from her station. "As if what was happening was perfectly normal, sir. We are maintaining stable existence across multiple dimensional phases. The Devourers cannot track us because we are technically not here." The alien fleet commander stared in shock as the single human ship systematically dismantled a swarm that should have been able to overwhelm every civilization in the galaxy combined. Dr. Lee Min-ho worked quietly in the engineering section, monitoring quantum fluctuations that would have driven alien scientists insane while making real-time adjustments to keep their reality anchor stable. The ship was not just fighting in normal space, it was fighting across multiple dimensions simultaneously. In one dimension, it appeared as a ship of pure energy that could pass through solid matter. In another, it was a creature of living mathematics that solved the existence of its enemies, like equations that canceled out to zero. Lieutenant Park so raw coordinated attacks with Earth's defense network, which extended far beyond what the aliens had imagined. Humanity had not just built one impossible ship, they had restructured the space around their entire solar system, turning it into a weapon that could strike anywhere in the galaxy instantaneously. The quantum computers on Earth calculated the position and momentum of every atom in the battle zone, predicting the movements of creatures that existed partially outside normal reality. The computers were so advanced they could simulate entire universes in the time it took a photon to travel 1 centimeter. Some devourers tried to adapt to the impossible attacks, but humans had anticipated this. The Ascendant began using weapons that attacked the concept of existence itself. Certain devourers simply stopped being real, as if they had never existed in the first place, leaving behind empty spaces in the swarm formation. Other weapons attacked the creature's connection to their home dimension, severing the links that allowed them to feed on reality itself. Cut off from their source of power, some of the largest devourers began to shrink and weaken until they were small enough for conventional weapons to destroy them. Most terrifying weapon of all was one that made the devourers experience every emotion their victims had ever felt as they were being consumed. Creatures that had known only hunger for millions of years suddenly felt fear and pain and despair. The shock of experiencing empathy was so great that many of them simply shut down, unable to process feelings they had never known existed. Commander Choi Jun SEO reported from his station, "Sir, the enemy formation is collapsing. Primary targets have been eliminated and secondary targets are beginning to retreat. The Devourers are showing signs of panic for the first time in their species history." The Devourers were afraid. They had encountered something that consumed them faster than they could consume it, something that treated their ancient power like a minor inconvenience to be brushed aside. The creatures that had terrorized the galaxy for eons were learning what it felt like to be prey. The alien fleet watched in stunned silence as impossible became routine. The human ship was not just winning, it was rewriting the rules of warfare in real time. Each attack was different from the last because the ship was learning and adapting faster than the enemy could respond. Yang Hai-jin announced, "Sir, we are detecting massive quantum signature fluctuations in the enemy formation. The Devourers are attempting to retreat to their home dimension." Kim Dae-ho smiled. It was the first time he had shown any emotion during the entire battle. "Let them go," he said, "but make sure they remember this lesson. Tag their quantum signatures so we can find them if they ever decide to come back." The Ascendant fired one final weapon, a burst of pure information that embedded itself in the genetic memory of every surviving devourer. The information was simple but devastating. It was the knowledge that they were not the apex predators they thought they were. There was something in the galaxy that was stronger and smarter and more ruthless than they could ever. Beatty remaining devourers fled into the dark spaces between galaxies, carrying with them the terrifying knowledge that the age of their dominance was over. They had met something that made them feel small and weak and helpless. The hunters had become the hunted, and they did not like the feeling. After the devourer swarm fled into the darkness between galaxies, the alien fleet commanders sat in stunned silence, trying to understand what they had just witnessed. Their most advanced sensors had recorded everything, but the data made no sense. According to everything they thought they knew about science and reality, Admiral Zephyros floated in his command tank, staring at readings that his computers insisted were impossible. His tentacles moved slowly through the water as if he was in a dream. The power output readings from the human ship were still climbing, even though the battle was over, suggesting that what they had seen was just a small demonstration of what the vessel could actually do. Ambassador Velter was the first to break the silence, and his purple skin had gone pale with shock. "We demand answers," he said, but his voice was much quieter than usual. "How did one species barely 50 years out of their own solar system create technology that makes our greatest achievements look like stone tools?" Captain Kim Dae-ho agreed to meet with the Galactic Council aboard their neutral station, but he did not arrive in a shuttle or transport ship. Instead, a doorway simply opened in the middle of the council chamber, and he stepped through it as casually as if he was walking from one room to another. The doorway closed behind him, leaving no trace that it had ever existed. The alien leaders stared at the spot where the impossible door had been. Their station was located light years away from the human ship, but Kim Dae-ho had traveled the distance in a single step, crossing space and time as if they were minor inconveniences to be ignored. "You want to know how we did it?" Kim Dae-ho said, simply taking his seat among beings who suddenly felt very primitive. "The answer is that we had Tudyar Lee Min-ho appeared next to him, but not physically. Instead, his image flickered into existence as a hologram that seemed more real than the actual aliens in the room. The hologram was connected to quantum systems aboard the Ascendant, and every time he moved, the lights in the station dimmed slightly as his presence drew power from their generators. Every species in this galaxy developed faster than light travel," Dr. Lee Min-ho explained, "and then you stopped pushing the boundaries of physics. You became comfortable with what you had achieved. You accepted limitations as if they were natural laws instead of challenges to be overcome." The Hive Queen clicked her mandibles nervously. Her compound eyes reflected the impossible sight of humans who spoke about rewriting the fundamental forces of the universe as if they were discussing the weather. "But the energy requirements alone should have been impossible," she said. "How did you power such technology without destroying your own planet?" Engineer Chief Kang Yu-jin materialized beside Dr. Lee's hologram, her tools still humming with residual exotic energy that made the aliens' instruments go crazy. "We learned to tap directly into the quantum vacuum," she explained patiently. "Every cubic centimeter of what you call empty space contains enough energy to boil all the oceans on Earth. The trick was learning how to access it without accidentally unmaking our solar system." The alien representatives sat in horrified silence as they realized what the humans were telling them. These creatures had learned to manipulate the fundamental forces that held reality together. They were treating universal constants like suggestions that could be ignored when they became inconvenient. Commander Theises of the reptilian hegemony was an old warrior, but his scales were trembling as he spoke. "You are insane," he whispered. "You are playing with forces that could unmake existence itself. What if you make a mistake? What if something goes wrong?" Commander Choi Jun Seo smiled, and the expression was both reassuring and terrifying. "Probably," he admitted, "we are definitely insane by your standards. But we are alive, and the devourers are running away. Sometimes insanity is the most rational response to an impossible situation." The truth was beginning to dawn on the assembled aliens. These humans had not just built a better warship, they had evolved beyond the limitations that other species accepted as permanent fixtures of reality. While the galaxy had spent centuries perfecting conventional technology, humans had quietly been rewriting the basic rules that governed how the universe worked. Dr. Lee Min-ho gestured, and suddenly the air in the chamber was filled with holographic displays showing human research stations throughout known space. Each station was pushing the boundaries of what alien scientists thought was possible, and each one was staffed by humans who treated the impossible as a starting point rather than an ending point. You've been studying your species for decades, he continued. Your mathematics, your physics, your understanding of how things work, all of it is based on the assumption that there are limits that cannot be crossed. We decided to find out what happened if we crossed them anyway, Lieutenant Park. So Ra appeared as another hologram, her image crackling with quantum interference that made the station's artificial gravity fluctuate. We started with small experiments, she explained, bending light around corners, making matter exist in two places at once, creating energy from nothing. The universe kept working, so we tried bigger experiments. The aliens listened in growing horror as the humans described decades of research that violated everything they thought they knew about safety and sanity. These creatures had been systematically breaking the laws of physics to see what would happen, and somehow they had not destroyed themselves. In the process, Yang Haijin flickered into existence next to the other holograms. Navigation through normal space was too slow, she said, so we learned to navigate through dimensions that your species cannot even detect. We found shortcuts through reality itself that let us travel anywhere instantly. The ethereals who existed as living energy beings began to pulse with agitation. Even they who had transcended physical form were bound by certain rules, but the humans seemed to have no rules at all. They were cosmic anarchists who had declared war on the concept of impossibility itself. Admiral Zephyros' tentacles writhed in his tank as he tried to process what he was hearing. But why, he gurgled, why take such terrible risks? Why not be satisfied with conventional technology like the rest of us, Captain Kim? Dae-ho leaned forward, and for the first time since entering the chamber his expression became serious. Because satisfaction kills, he said quietly. Every species in this galaxy reached a point where they said, this is good enough, this is all we need. And then they stopped growing, stopped learning, stopped becoming more than they were. The humans paused, letting their words sink in. The alien leaders looked around at each other, seeing their own limitations reflected in the faces of their fellow council members. They had built great civilizations and powerful fleets, but they had also built invisible cages that kept them from reaching their true potential. We could have built 50 conventional warships, Kim Dae-ho continued, but 50 ships would have just meant 50 more targets for the Devourers to destroy. Instead, we built one ship that could do what 50,000 conventional ships could not. Lee Min-ho nodded and added, we did not just want to fight the Devourers. We wanted to teach them that there were consequences for threatening inhabited worlds. We wanted them to understand that the galaxy was no longer defenseless. The Alien Council members sat in silence, absorbing the magnitude of what they had learned. These humans had not just saved the galaxy. They had elevated it to a new level of existence. They had proven that evolution did not stop with biology, that intelligence could continue growing and developing long after a species reached the stars. The galaxy would never be the same, because now every species knew that the impossible was just another word for something that had not been achieved, yet the age of limitations was ending and the age of human-inspired transcendence had begun. 6 months had passed since the Devourers fled into the dark spaces between galaxies, and the entire structure of galactic civilization had changed in ways that no one could have predicted. The Ascendant had returned to Earth, but its influence remained everywhere like ripples spreading across the surface of a cosmic pond. Human advisors now worked alongside alien scientists on research stations throughout known space, teaching them principles that challenged everything they thought they understood about the universe. These were not just new technologies, they were new ways of thinking about what was possible. When intelligent beings refused to accept that anything was truly impossible, Admiral Kim Dae-ho had been promoted to oversee humanity's growing influence in galactic affairs, but he still preferred to work from his simple office on Earth rather than from some grand space station. The other species no longer saw humanity as backward newcomers. Instead, they recognized them as the most advanced civilization that had ever existed. Lieutenant Park So-ra now served as Earth's primary liaison to the Galactic Council, and her daily reports showed how rapidly the galaxy was changing. The Zenthari want to learn our dimensional folding techniques, she reported during their morning briefing. The Aquatic Federation is asking for help with their energy production problems, and the reptilian hegemony wants us to teach them how to build quantum computers, but the changes went deeper than just technology. The entire philosophical foundation of galactic civilization was shifting. Species that had spent millennia believing that certain things were impossible were learning to ask a different question. Instead of asking whether something could be done, they were learning to ask how it could be done. Dr. Li Min Ho had established research centers on dozens of worlds, each one pushing the boundaries of what alien scientists believed possible. His students included representatives from every major species, all eager to learn how humans had transcended the limitations that had held back galactic development for thousands of years. The most popular course was called Basic Reality Manipulation, and it started with simple exercises like making objects exist in two places at once. Students who had spent their entire careers working within the established laws of physics suddenly found themselves learning to bend those laws like flexible rules rather than rigid barriers. Engineer Chief Kang Yu-jin taught advanced classes on quantum engineering, showing alien students how to build machines that drew power from the empty space between atoms. Her workshops were always overcrowded because every species wanted to learn how to tap into the infinite energy that surrounded them. But perhaps the most significant change was not in technology or science, but in attitude. The galaxy had lived in fear of the Devourers for thousands of years, accepting their periodic attacks as an inevitable natural disaster like earthquakes or volcanic eruptions. Humanity had proven that inevitability was just another limitation to be overcome. Admiral Kim Dae-ho often spoke to gatherings of alien leaders, sharing the philosophy that had driven humanity's breakthrough. We did not build the Ascendant to show off, he would explain. We built it because someone had to. The galaxy needed protection, and we were the only species crazy enough to think we could provide it. The alien leaders would nod respectfully, having learned humility from a species that had taught itself to ignore the word impossible. They were beginning to understand that their greatest limitation had not been technology or resources, but imagination, the ability to conceive of solutions that existed outside conventional thinking. Captain Choi Jun-seo now commanded one of several new human vessels that patrolled the edges of known space. Each ship was smaller than the Ascendant, but still more powerful than entire alien fleets. They used technology that made the impossible routine, traveling through dimensions that existed only in mathematical theory and striking targets in the past, present, and future simultaneously. Yang Haijin had become the galaxy's leading expert on multidimensional navigation, teaching alien pilots how to plot courses through realities that their species had never known existed. Her students learned to think of space and time not as fixed coordinates but as fluid concepts that could be manipulated by sufficiently advanced technology. In the depths of space, automated human probes searched for signs of the Devourer's return, but these were not passive monitoring devices. They were active hunters using technology that could track enemies across multiple dimensions and strike them before they could threaten any inhabited world. The probes had already found several small Devourer groups hiding in the space between galaxies and had eliminated them with weapons that erased their targets from existence so completely that they had never been real in the first place. The galaxy was no longer waiting for the next attack, it was actively preventing attacks from ever happening. Dr. Li Min-ho spent his time working on projects that would have seemed like magic to earlier generations of scientists. He was developing tools that could restructure the fundamental forces of the universe, making gravity stronger or weaker as needed and adjusting the speed of light to make interstellar travel more convenient. His latest project involved creating pocket universes that could serve as safe havens for entire civilizations. If the Devourers ever returned in numbers too great to fight, these pocket universes could preserve billions of lives until the threat was eliminated. The project required rewriting the laws of physics on a cosmic scale, but that no longer seemed like an insurmountable challenge. Lieutenant Park So Ra worked with alien governments to help them adapt to the new reality. Many species were struggling to accept that their most fundamental assumptions about the universe had been wrong. They needed time to adjust to the idea that limitations were temporary inconveniences rather than permanent Some alien philosophers had begun calling this the Great Awakening, a period when intelligent life in the galaxy finally realized its true potential after thousands of years of slow, incremental progress. Suddenly anything seemed possible. As long as there were beings brave enough or crazy enough to attempt it, the human research stations became pilgrimage sites for young aliens who wanted to learn how to think beyond conventional boundaries. Students would arrive believing in the limits their teachers had taught them and leave understanding that those limits existed only in their minds. Admiral Kim Dae-ho would often stand at his office window looking out at the stars and smiling. The galaxy had waited for a fleet to save them, but humanity had given them something better. They had given them the knowledge that salvation was not something that had to be waited for, but something that could be created by beings who refused to accept defeat. The Ascendant still existed somewhere in the dimensional spaces around Earth, ready to respond if the galaxy ever faced another impossible threat. But its greatest victory was not the defeat of the Devourers, it was the transformation of galactic civilization from a collection of species that accepted limitations into a community of beings that saw challenges as opportunities to grow. As Admiral Kim Dae-ho watched a new generation of human and alien scientists working together on projects that would have been considered fantasy just months before he knew that the galaxy would never again face a threat it could not overcome. The age of impossibility was ending, and the age of unlimited potential had begun. The stars themselves seemed brighter now, as if the universe was celebrating the fact that its children had finally learned to dream without boundaries. The galaxy had awaited a fleet, but humanity had given them something infinitely more valuable. They had given them the understanding that there were no limits except the ones they chose to accept.